Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns, the Anti-Federalist. Yes, they did. And continuously prove they got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network with Tom Novolis, your host. And yes, I am delighted that you're here with me again on this Saturday programming. Oh my goodness, it's just been another chock full of historical events, if you will, in so many different ways. But first off, one of the things that I would really like to do is I would like to thank William Harry and the Sons of the American Revolution in Erie, Pennsylvania, and that chapter in that northwest section of Pennsylvania for inviting myself, or actually they invited Sam Adams, to participate in an event that they have where they work with students. Students are nominated from schools, high schools around the area, and these are students that are seniors getting ready to graduate. And it is a recognition of a number of different achievements, and I'm not going to go into all of the details around it, but there were 6 students that were honored at this very special awards dinner. And they did invite Mr. Adams to come in and be the keynote speaker, which I always thoroughly personally enjoy being able to bring the history to life, as you know, as Sam Adams, but in particular, the honor of being able to participate in something like that with either the Daughters of the American Revolution or the Sons of the American Revolution. And that's an organization that if you believe that you have a historic family background, if it's a family background that you can trace all the way back to the Revolutionary period, I would recommend that you take and look into it. I think that it is a strong organization in ensuring that our heritage, that the realities and the truths of our heritage are remembered and are brought forward. I was very, very impressed with both how they look at the organization and what they talk about at the very beginning of a program, as well as what they have at the end of the program to remember our heritage, our historical heritage. And that's what this program's about. That's what Samuel Adams Returns and the website and everything we do is all about. That's what Samuel Adams Center for Political Science is all about, is that we are bringing foundational truths to that which is needed. And we're going to talk about that specific because this is what this program is defined for. When I say that the Anti-Federalists, they got it right, what I usually talk about is that there's nothing new under the sun from Ecclesiastes. So with nothing new under the sun, we look at what is humankind. And quite frankly, as we look at today's program, and I go through a list of things here on my handy-dandy phone, while I have other things on as far as a lot of the current events that are so relevant to today's program, I just shake my head in that the strong difference that I will continue to say from when the American Revolution started actually back in 1750. And as it moved forward, that without the Great Awakening, and I'll repeat that, without the Great Awakening, we would have never been able to stand strong and move the minds and hearts of the people in such a way that we would stand up for righteousness in our nation. I will preface the whole program with this right now, is that our nation is a degenerated nation. We are a nation of degenerates, and the degenerates I will list as we go through all of this conversation. I want to pick up, because I still think it is, and I will, I promise you. I don't know if I'll get to it this week. I couldn't get to it last week, but I may get to it this coming week, is to pick up from last Sunday on the sermon by Samuel Langdon. And in that sermon was the Republic of Israel and what that means to us today. So with taking that into consideration, here is something that is the foundation for all that is happening. And I'm going to talk about these step downs within Congress, the attacks on Judge Roy Moore, the Christian evangelical silly responses. Look, I tell you over and over, I am not a theologian, okay? A theologian. And I think that most modern theologians are logians. I don't understand their theology, and that's why I am strong on the Reformation. I am strong on what that means, and quite frankly, what I am going to talk about as well, and I'm going to set it up for you, is that I say, based on everything in the media today, that every book, every idea, everything that came out of the writings of Augustine from Hippo needs to be wiped from history. You get that? Augustine. Everything needs to be wiped from history. You know why? Yes. Augustine was almost like the right hand of Caligula in his sexual perversity. Augustine did everything egregious. He did everything profane. He was a drunkard. He was a whoremonger. He was everything you could ever think of worse than even Al Franken or John Conyers. Yes, Augustine, worse than any of that. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, based on what is in the nonsense, oh, wait a minute, I can't say that, based on how America now looks at determining what is righteous, what is godly, what is religion, Augustine needs to be wiped from history. And yes, it's because the media is able to take and determine what you think about truth. The media is there to determine what you think about God. The media is there to determine what you believe and how you should take and choose those who represent you in our government. Let me leave you with that thought for a few moments. You see, Augustine should be wiped from history and every one of his books burned and removed from the minds of men because it was proven. He wrote of it himself, being a whoremonger, being a drunkard, being despicable to his very mother. Let me take you now on another course. This is the course of picking up what we talked about last week, that of Samuel Langdon. I'm going to pick it up in the middle of it. You see, Samuel Langdon understood that in 1788 we were in the process of adopting the Constitution of the United States of America. This is what he said, and this is what the mainstream media does not understand. This is what is not taught in churches. It's not taught in education. It's not, well, let's just say it's not taught anywhere. It's not even talked about in the media whatsoever. Langdon brings this perspective to bear. He says, in regards to this Constitution that is now being accepted and adopted by the various states, he goes like this, that as God, in the course of his kind providence, hath given you an excellent constitution of government, founded on the most rational, equitable, and liberal principles, by which all that liberty is secured which a people can reasonably claim, and you are empowered to make righteous laws for promoting public order and good morals. And as he has moreover given you by his Son Jesus Christ, who is far superior to Moses, a complete revelation of his will and perfect system of true religion, that being Christianity, plainly delivered in the sacred writings, it will be your wisdom in the eyes of the nations and your true interest and happiness to conform your practice in the strictest manner to the excellent principles of your government, adhere faithfully to the doctrines and commands of the gospel, and practice every public and private virtue. Okay, so we can take everything that's going on over the last few months, everything that's been going on the last few weeks in particular, and render it all down here from that whole perspective right to this middle of a paragraph, if you will. So what our founders were expecting, and I talk about this over and over, is that the Federalist, if you will, Madison in particular, Hamilton to some degree, John Jay in a manner, all expected that Samuel Langdon and others like him would continue to preserve these exact truths on what it takes for self-governance, you and I morally having good governance of ourselves, and then how that becomes extensible within the context of society, and how then it is applied within the context of our government, both local and then obviously national. Ladies and gentlemen, when you render this down, I've been going through, this week I've been taking and looking at a lot of the modern day theologians and the writings, and even those that are in the Reformed movement, some of the big names, and how they've really come out in a confusing manner, if you will. I mean, I'm talking about some of the really big name guys. I read their commentaries or their articles on either what's going on with Judge Roy Moore or this, and I'm sitting here and going, where is it that these guys, these theologians, take and go back and have looked at these foundational sermons, have looked at these foundational concepts, these foundational beliefs? And one of the ones that I'm going to bring to you in the next segment, as we wrap up this segment, is something from John Knox, which I think establishes very, very clearly a base for much of what I talked about last week on the doctrine of the lesser magistrate. John Knox in his Appellation. I don't know. I'm not smart enough. I didn't go to any of these theological seminaries or any of that stuff. I'm just a simple citizen that tries to simply understand what the Bible teaches and how that applies in governance in general. And I mean, John Knox wrote this Appellation, and I know for a fact that those were the types of things that Sam Adams would study, because he almost quotes a number of different things from the Appellations throughout his various writings. So when we look at, and when we come back in the next segment to see how it's not just what Samuel Adams would apply, but what was preached in that day that the people understood from that great awakening, and clearly understood that we needed to have moral and virtuous leaders, not only publicly, but also privately. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the issue of today. That is the course by which we have not taken for over 100 years. So as we think about this and we consider it, I'm really looking forward to you returning with me into the next segment as Samuel Adams returns today. And that's what the SRA people were saying. Samuel Adams must return today so that our republic can move forward in truth and principle. Thanks a lot, and come on back for the next segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns, the Anti-Federalists. Yes, they did. They absolutely got it right. And I'll tell you what, I think this program, more than any others, is proving that to be true based on the topics that we're driving through. Now, I got to make a correction here, is that my first producer, Kathy, was taking and listening, and she said, I goofed, Major. So with my major goof, I want to correct that, and that the Sons of the American Revolution, the acronym, as you could tell by the words Sons of the American Revolution, is SAR, not the mix-up that apparently I did in the last segment of SRA. I don't know what SRA is, but maybe I'm kind of keying in on that revolution, Sons of Revolution for America. I don't know, but anyway, I just want to bring it to your attention again that the Sons of the American Revolution, SAR, is a fantastic group, and I sure hope that you can check them out, even attend their public events, and if you qualify, I would definitely suggest that you take and search your background, especially those folks on the Eastern Seaboard. There's so many of you that may be able to participate in that, and I'll tell you what, get the youth involved. This is another program where the youth need to be involved. And as far as involvement, here again, this is all about what's happening on Liberty Works Radio Network, and I would ask you to take and help the network, donate, look at who the other hosts and hostesses are, look at the weekly programming that is going on, especially in your drive hours home, and take and listen to some very, very interesting folks as they bring, especially in that in the Maryland and Northern Virginia markets, some very good information as to what is happening in those areas that you live. Go on there, go on the website, hit that donate button, and kick in a couple bucks. And as you're thinking about what is happening here for Christmas, if you like to give books to folks, then I would ask that you take and get Not All Conservatives Are Constitutionalists. You can get that at the SamuelAdamsReturns.com website. I prefer if you get it there. If you want to, snuggle up to Amazon and buy it there, I'm fine with that. But if you buy it directly from the website, that not only brings you to the website, but also it helps me out a lot more in taking and being able to do the things that we do. And that, again, you can find it at SamuelAdamsReturns.com. So let's pick up again on some of the things that we were talking about in the first segment. In the first segment, I clearly articulated that based on the new religion and the primary preachers, and I mean the primary preachers, the ministers of the people, the mainstream media. Maybe I have to figure out how to take and use that MSM acronym a little bit different. Let's see, mainstream ministers. That's what they are. They're the mainstream ministers of America's cultural religion, and that based on what they preach all the time, that their ideas of morality and their ideas of truth, that in that, based on these mainstream ministers and looking at historical stuff, looking at that, then we have to take Augustine of Hippo and completely wipe him off the planet. Every remembrance of anything he ever told, anything that ever influenced any aspect of this thing, this despicable thing, according to the mainstream ministers, this despicable thing of other than their self-created morality and religion, Hippo doesn't belong in there. The Augustine of Hippo does not belong. And in fact, I think they've already done a pretty good job of, wiping out all of the truths that he talks about. Because in effect, Augustine was one of the first ones to stand up and speak of this doctrine of the lesser magistrate. Yeah, it's in his writings. It is there. Wow. Think about that. So let's draw back a little bit. Let's draw back again in what I reminded you of from Langdon's sermon on the Republic of Israel and its relationship to we the people. Let's look at that what we're not seeing. When I scroll through, and I don't care if I'm looking at the Yahoo, if I'm looking at Fox, if I'm looking at MSNBC, if I'm looking at Breitbart, if I'm looking at Daily Caller, all of the other different types of on your phone media that you can get, you can hit the scroll and look at away you go, and let's see, where does it? Oh, it landed on an advertisement. That might be the only thing that's halfway decent there. Let's see, roll it again. Oh, it landed on another one. Let's roll it again. Oh, okay, this ended up on the Franken thing. Oh, the Franken thing. Yeah, it ended up there as I just hit the scroll. Ladies and gentlemen, when we look at this, and here's my opinion, no different than if the mainstream ministers would take and say, and which they have, that Augustine is irrelevant. No different than that, what they are doing and establishing is what I've talked about because of the way that the media has become so corrupted and influenced by, I'll just say it, influenced by communist, progressive, globalist ideology. That's the religion, okay? The no religion of an atheist being a communist is a religion of ideology that suppresses every aspect of mankind. And you have to understand, as I always say, is that globalism is nothing more than the modern day feudalism, where you have only those that are worthy elites to be at the top can determine what everyone else should think and do. Anyway, that's a whole program unto itself. But the real aspect of what's going on and that driving and using of the mainstream ministers and the words of their communist ideology is their Hegelian dialectic, which I've done some programs on before. And the Hegelian dialectic takes and it pushes aside truth. It pushes aside those that don't take and come into that belief system. It takes and it goes after them over and over and over and over. And it will sacrifice some of its own to fulfill its ultimate ideological goals. Just think of it. Here you had old Stalin. He took charge and all of that good stuff, and then what did he do? He went over and shot everybody else that were his friends that helped him get to the level of power that he wanted to get to. So that's what I see happening in the Democrat Party, and I see happening within the context of the mainstream ministers. Yeah, don't forget that during the Reformation period, let's be real, is that we had a lot of bloodshed because people were not standing purely on the Word of God, but were going after an ideology, which when you look at ideology, it just means going after their idols. That's a lot of what Knox talked about in the Appellation. He did. So let me finish up with Franken and Conyer and all of this. The one that is just really blowing my mind is that you have the weak-minded Republican of all is sitting there in Paul Ryan and then in his cohort in the other chamber, telling a guy like Trent Frank that he needs to go away. So here we're seeing these sacrificial lambs, if you will, being put out by both political parties, which Langdon warned not to be involved in, as Washington warned not to be involved in. You see these people thrown out to the wolves of the mainstream ministers in such a way that it takes and does not allow for justice to work. And that's what Langdon was talking about just in that paragraph. We would have just laws. We have righteous laws for promoting public order and good morals. Let me finish before I go off into another direction with that. So what we're not seeing is that the rule of law can take and judge the actual facts of these men, of their accusations. Do I think that Conyer and Franken should resign? I've struggled with that, and it's going to be contrary to what many people think. That is for their conscience to determine, and also what it is for the ethics committees within the House and the Senate to determine. It is not for the mainstream ministers hammering in the public square and crying out to determine. I'm sorry. I just absolutely believe that if we are going to take and follow what our founders intended from the rule of law, that's how it should be. Let it run its course. Let these men then go before their voters. Because to me, that's where we failed, is that we have not properly established these truths that Langdon talks about, to the extent that then we have a proper vetting process by which we know what the public and private virtue is of those candidates which we would then promote and move forward and elect. Remember, Madison and John Adams definitely said that this Constitution was for a moral and virtuous people. So if we don't understand that morality, if we don't have what Langdon is talking about here, and we do not understand the basics of the law of Moses, and I did see an article here that said that it was in a particular city that the Ten Commandments was being retained because the American Communist Union, ACLU, American Communists, whatever you want to call them, but that's what they are. The ACLU is a bunch of communists, even by their admitted roots. But they did not prevail in this city, so therefore the Ten Commandments can stand strong. And that's what Judge Roy Moore stood up. And as a lesser magistrate that we get to here, is that as that lesser magistrate, he was absolutely correct to stand against the Supreme Court in both that ruling as well as that in the homosexual marriage ruling. The court is absolutely wrong, because what we're supposed to have, and this is where the court is also determining the religion for those mainstream ministers, because Langdon says that our Constitution, and this is what Madison says, this is what John Adams said, this is what a lot of the Federalists said, is that our Constitution being for a moral and virtuous people, that means that you would have moral, righteous laws for public order and good morals. Righteous laws for public order and good moral. And it is the duty of the magistrates to uphold morality. So when we have exactly what the anti-federalists, Samuel Adams and the other anti-federalists charged, is that under this Constitution it would take and allow for what we see. Judges. Judges now determining national morality under a false interpretation of the 14th Amendment, using things like the 14th Amendment continuously to rewrite the morality of America and establish the new religion so that you can have, yes, MSM, mainstream ministers, culturally changing everything that is there. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll ask you to come on back in the next segment when Samuel Adams returns, and the anti-federalists absolutely got it right because they warned, they predicted exactly where we are today and what has been causing our issues, that of not following what Langdon says, the God of the universe, the biblical truths of which bring us good laws and morality. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, are you getting it? They got it right. And yes, this is a program on Liberty Works Radio Network where liberty does work for you and where you can clearly understand that our founders intended, and even the framers, as much as people want to argue that back and forth, the majority of the framers wanted us to be a moral and religious people, have that morality and that virtue. And it comes from Christianity, not the new religion that we see of the Supreme Court, not the new religion that we see of the mainstream ministers, not the new religion of environmentalism. Ladies and gentlemen, all of that religion that has taken and created the America that our anti-federalist founders talked about is, yes, it is exactly what Washington, D.C. area on the map, if you look at the map, they were always wondering, oh, okay, here's a hill, we can do this, this, and this, but Washington, D.C. was built on a swamp, And isn't it interesting then, taking that the Capitol, the White House, those areas, it's called Capitol Hill for a reason, because the Capitol was built on a hill. And the rest of the area around it is a swamp that's been filled in. But what we have seen over the last 100 years, and maybe a little bit more, but in particular, the last 100 years, is that, if you take and you bury something long enough, these are just the basics of agriculture, if you will, is if you bury the seeds and you cover them over, and then eventually you start supplying the right manure, that the heads start to pop up. And what you have are the heads of the hydra, the heads of the swamp monsters that are poking through every avenue, especially in those key corridors of government. My word, what an analogy that we can look at, that from the very swamp of that ground, we have now what the anti-federalists predicted would happen if, and this is also true of if, we did not maintain that moral and virtuous people. Samuel Langdon, he preached it, he talked about it, he gave us that section there, just amazingly. There was one other little comment I wanted to make here in jumping on. Let's see if I can find that reference before I move to another reference within the context of this sermon. Oh my, let's see. He says, let not men openly irreligious and immoral become your legislators. Holy smokes! This goes back to exactly where I opened the program with. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're seeing is that not only openly, look, and I love that one because I laugh at myself and say that because that's what you hear on all of the news programs now, is the little opening quibble. Look! So, ladies and gentlemen, look. What we see, Al Franken was already a pervert before he got elected. Okay? When you take and you look at the character of a lot of these people that get elected into office, if one takes and goes, oh, we'll just put that all aside, we don't have to worry about what their character is. No. What's a person's character is critical to how they will govern. Because if they have no sense of morality, if they have no sense of the fundamentals of Judeo-Christian biblical truth, that of the Old Testament and those that are Jewish, the Torah, and I don't care what your denominational preference is, and that's what the First Amendment is really about on the Establishment Clause, you clowns in the ACLU, you other liberal, leftist, communist lawyers. That's all you are, is you're communists. You despise the truth. The Establishment Clause was set up so that there would not be a national denomination. It was not to remove God from government. And so if you take and you have openly irreligious and openly immoral people that you elect, wow, guess what? You get what you get. But that goes then to those that are falsely claiming what it's all about and these accusations. What accusations are accusations. And witnesses are to be brought before the court. And when there is a connection within that which becomes more what? Before the court is presented as evidence, then a determination is made. But in the case of the likes of Al Franken, ladies and gentlemen, people knew he was a pervert. He was a so-called mainstream minister of perverted comedy. I usually call it comedians because everything they do is in the toilet. And there's many, many of them out there. And Al Franken has always been a comedian of that nature. So there you have. Let not men openly irreligious and immoral become your legislators. And the other thing on Al Franken, he hated God. He hates God. He hates that truth. So I don't know what else I can tell you about that. He says, how far can you expect good laws to be made by men who have no fear of God before their eyes and who boldly trample on the authority of his commands? Oh my goodness. And will not the example of their impiety and immorality defeat the efficacy of the best laws which can be made in favor of religion and virtue? If the legislative body are corrupt, you will soon have bad men for counselors, corrupt judges, unqualified justices, and officers in every department who will dishonor their station, the consequence of which will be murmurers and complaints from every quarter. Holy smokes! You know, I don't even have the Anti-Federalist Papers. You have it right here from Langdon. You have everything that is happening within the body of government today. You see me keep jumping around with this pile of papers. I don't know. This is like 21 pages. 21 pages. I got to show you this because this is mind-blowing. So I'm going to move it up close to the lens of the camera for those of you that will be watching this on YouTube. Look at the print on that. 21 pages of print that size? What is it? This is the Appellation in 1558 by John Knox. Obviously, that just would take too much to get into it, but John Knox, as you well know, was being... Actually, he was already burned at the stake in effigy, and he was determined to be a heretic by the Catholics in Scotland. And whereas this was all part of, 1558 was all part of the major Reformation move, and the Appellation, which is no longer taught in seminaries, in Bible colleges, no longer even considered. I mean, my church doesn't consider it. Where I go, the pastors, they tout about the Reformation and Scott, but I don't think they ever read the Appellation, nor do they understand the application of it. But what was happening is this is one of the formal documents that brings about for all of you that I already discussed that would be judges, that would be elected officials at every level of elected official, every counselor that would be there, every person that would be a justice, every officer of every department. I don't care if you're the guy that running the roads in your county or your township. You need to be a moral person, because otherwise the consequences will be murmurs and complaints from every quarter. So John Knox was standing up. He was standing up, and what he was doing, he was calling on all of the political forces there in Scotland to take a position that would be their godly position. I just have to read this to you because, again, I'm not going to get into these 21 pages, but what he says here in kind of a summary, to you, all you elected officials, judges, and even those that are in the bureaucracy, you see, the thing that he talks about earlier, and which I've talked about before out of the book of Jeremiah, is you can be a religious leader, and you can actually take and make the Torah, the Bible, and that an idol, which is exactly what happened, and Langdon talks about it, and then John Knox talks about it as well. So what happens in there is that he clearly identifies that it is God who appoints those into leadership, every level, from a bureaucrat all the way through. If you think you're there because you filled out the job application and you got the job as director of roads or whatever it is that you have, you're wrong. You got it because God either prepared you for it, unbeknown to you, and yes, you put the application in and you were hired based on a process of determination. And the same thing goes for all elected officials. So John Knox was appealing to those. He says, my petition is that you whom God has appointed heads in your commonwealth with single eye do study to promote the glory of God, to provide that your subjects be rightly instructed in his true religion, that they be defended from all oppression and tyranny, that true teachers may be maintained, and such as blind and deceive the people, together also with all idle bellies which do rob and oppress the flock, may be removed and punished as God's law prescribes. And to the performance of every one of these do your offices and names, the honors and benefits which you receive, the law of God universally given to men, and the examples of most godly princes bind and oblige you. Okay? My purpose is not to greatly labor to provide that your whole study ought to promote the glory of God, neither yet I will study to allege the reasons that justly may be brought to prove that you are not exalted to reign above your brethren as men without the case and solitude. For these are the principles so grafted in nature that every ethics, or meaning pagans, have confessed the same. So what he's talking about is that just in general law alone, just in common sense, is that, you know what, you have to do the right thing. You have to do what Langdon talked about and I mentioned earlier. And you know what? You have to take and bring forth even the ideas of Augustine of Hippo, because all of those are the truths and the principles upon which we need to stand on to have a moral and virtuous people. Ladies and gentlemen, morality and virtue shouldn't be looked at once someone gets into office. We really do need to look at it. And we have to use law, not accusations, just as a means. We have to go through a process and what is given to us under the Constitution. So as I look at closing out today, because we're at the end of the program, is yes, that's exactly correct, that Madison, John Adams, myself, we all looked at the fact and the reality. And what was preached here is that if you have openly irreligious and immoral people as your legislators, you're going to get what you have. You're going to get the government that is before you today. So ladies and gentlemen, let's first look for the new reawakening, and that'll happen when ministers understand these truths and go back to what Jesus Christ has given us in totality. And as we come back next week for Samuel Adams to return and looking into the mirrors of history, because the anti-federalists, yes, ladies and gentlemen, the anti-federalists absolutely got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty works